Is Bill ready?
Ready.
Okay. I guess we can go ahead and start then.
Okay, thank you. I did a clinic on operation a few months ago and it was terrible. And I apologize for that. My granddaughter tried to teach me PowerPoint and I didn't quite get all of it. And I got the wrong pictures in the wrong place. And it wasn't a very good job, but you guys were really nice about it. And I appreciate that. So I'm going to try to redeem myself today. The first thing I want to say is I grew up on 027 trains, like probably a lot of you did. And when I got my first one, my dad got a 3x7 sheet of plywood and nailed the track down on it. And I had 3 different trains successively, not all at one time, but 027 trains. And then in junior high school, I graduated to HO, and this was in the late 1940s. So I ripped up all the old 27 track and started my first HO layout. And what it was just a simple oval. And I had two track yards, one on one side and one on the other. And I had 2 sources of power. One was a Varney dockside tank engine, no tender. It was a $15 kit in those days. You had to clean off the flash and paint it and put it together, make it run. I got to run fairly well, but at that time I was patronizing Hall's hobby shop in Dallas, and Buddy Hall told me to raise the worm gear up above the gear on the wheels a little bit and it would run better. And I did that, and man, it ran like a clock. It was really nice. And I had a 4-wheel diesel switcher. I don't know who, can't remember who made that, Lindbergh or somebody like that. Those were my 2 engines. I had, I think, 8 or 9 cars. And I had a friend down the street, David, who built a real nice layout on a ping pong table. And so we went back and forth on each other's layouts, and he came down to mine, and we had operating sessions. And the standard practice was the train would go out, go to the other siding on the opposite side, drop off 2 cars, pick up 2 other cars, go back to where it came from. Then the other locomotive would take a train out, do the same thing, 2 cars in, 2 cars out. It was simple, but we had a lot of fun with it. And the reason I mention it is because I just want to say you don't have to have a huge layout to have operation. We did a lot of operating on that 3x7 foot layout, and it can be done. It doesn't take a whole lot. What you need is a couple of yards, sidings where you can drop off and pick things up. Things were very primitive in those days. The turnouts we had were Atlas that you had to lay for yourself. They gave you a template to follow, and you spiked it down on fiber ties. You couldn't get ready-made switches in the late 40s. And we powered them with automobile choke cables. The couplers we used were old Mantua couplers. That was all you could get in those days. They looked like squared off tennis rackets on the end of your cars, but they worked perfectly. They never uncoupled when you didn't want them to. They were easy to couple when you backed into them. They worked, they uncoupled on cardboard coupling ramps that you could just make out a piece of cardboard yourself, put them anywhere you wanted. So it was a very simple layout, but we did a lot of operation on it. So don't ever think that your layout is not big enough for operation. Larry gave all of us, I guess, a list of questions about our layouts and why we chose to do them like we did. Most of you have seen my layout, and what I was after when I set up operation was simplicity. I wanted simple operation that was easy to do. The first person that I knew that started operating around here was Pete Birdsong. He's since moved to California. And the other one was Bill Robbins. And so I went back and forth on those 2, learning about operation. I had built a new layout, but it wasn't suitable for operation. So I tore it up and built another one that would work well for operation. I have far more track than you ought to have on a layout. It's mostly track. There's not as much room for scenery as I would like, but I wanted to have many possibilities for dropping off and leaving cars and doing various kinds of operation. The basic way operating worked in my layout is a train leaves one end of the layout to go to the other, and on the way he stops at 2 yards and drops off cars along the way. When he gets to the other end of the layout, he will eventually, some other trains will go before he does, but he will eventually go back and pick up those cars on the way back to where he actually started. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yards on my layout. And each yard has its own switcher that's dedicated to that yard. And it has its own throttle, which is dedicated to that yard. So if you're operating and you want to switch something using that switcher, you don't have to reset your throttle to a different address, but you pick up the dedicated throttle and use that. And that causes things to go much more smoothly. He had a question about the cost of my choice. I have DCC, I have Digitrack, DCC. And if you're going to have dedicated throttles, that requires 7 throttles. And that's an expense. Plus, I have at least 4 throttles actually I have 4 throttles for engineers and 2 for yard masters. So the big expense to me was buying a lot of throttles. The yard throttles are all tethered. They're not going to go anywhere. They're just going to work for that yard. So having tethered throttles works okay there. It's a small layout. It's 23 by 11.5, and it's open in the middle for people to work to operate it. It kind of goes around the wall. And I can, at max, keep 6 people busy if I have 2 yard masters, 1 at each major terminal, and 4 engineers operating trains. So for that reason, I haven't invited everybody to come operate on my layout. I wish I could do that. I'd love to do it. But as it is, if everybody comes, I have 8 people that regularly come. Several people have to sit out a while somebody else works and then come back in and, take his turn. So it's a relatively small layout, and keeping 4 people or 6 people busy at one time is the maximum that we can do. I have 2 groups that operate. It's a group in this club, and they're all experienced operators. They know how to do it. Everything runs really well, and it's a great time with them. I have a group from our church that likes to operate. Only one has a layout now. Another one did, but he moved to Virginia. And so they operate with 2-man crews. One is an engineer, one's the conductor. The engineer runs the train, the conductor handles the switching. So they do that, and then the next run they switch positions. And the other one's the operator, and the other one's the conductor. And that works well for those people, but they're still, they don't have, most of them don't have layouts of their own, so they're, they get a little nervous about things. They can't quite remember how to do things, and it takes a little help, a little merger along the way. The layout I have was designed for continuous running, but as you know from my clinic I did, I put a train on one curve so nobody can go past that, and that forces point-to-point operation, which is more realistic, I think. And that works out pretty well. The one disadvantage, the one thing everybody hates about my layout is the duck under. And I understand that. I don't like it either, but I duck under it many times a day. The reason for that, I thought about designing a layout that had return loops at each end. But with the space I had, I would have had to have about 22 radius curves at each end. And I wanted 26 radius curves so I could operate anything that I had. And so that is why I have the duck under, which makes possible much more broad curves. I have a call board, some of you have seen, that has the name of the trains on it, and then it has an area where you can put a little piece of cardboard that has your name on it on a hook beside that train. And usually we have, if we run 4 trains at a time, then, you know, we put up 4 people there, and when the top one finishes his train, he goes down to the 5th spot. When the second one finishes his train, he goes down to the 6th spot. And that way it keeps everything in order. You know what your next train is going to be. Normally, we run 12 trains, that is 6 each way, with 4 or 5 commuter trains in between. The commuter trains run from one station to another. There's no switching with them, but they have to play dodgem with the freight trains, and provides a little more interest. Actually, I have one person now that runs all the commuter trains. He knows them, he knows the routes, and that keeps him pretty busy on the system. So there are a lot of people in this club. There's some people on this screen here that have operated there. They might want to make some comments about it, but basically that's how my layout works. Very simple, point to point, drop cars going out, pick up cars coming back. I do that with both passenger and freight. I love passenger trains. So the majority of my trains are passenger trains, but they do a lot of switching. They drop express cars, they drop baggage cars, they drop RPO mail cars, they drop dining cars. And so there's as much switching with them as there is with freight trains, and that makes my love for passenger trains possible. So that's my operating scheme.
Yeah, Bill, I apologize. I've got a drawing of your layout. I didn't think about it beforehand. I could have made a copy and brought it up, and you could talk around that. I don't have it available, but I apologize for that.
Oh, it's okay, no problem. I think a lot of people here have already seen that layout. Yeah.
Ready?
Hey, that looks familiar. As noted, Jeff Edge. I'm up here in Georgetown. My railroad represents the Erie-Lackawanna, the Mahoning Division, the first and second subdivisions up in Northeast Ohio. I've been modeling 50, 60 years now. I've been operating seriously for a good 40 plus years of that. I've been off to the OPSIG weekends, the op till you drop, that sort of activities. I've operated on a variety of different schemes. The one I was asked to comment on mostly today is my usage of the car card and waybill system. So if you want to go ahead and slip the page there, Bob, just a real quick overview. The way car cards and waybills are set up. First off, if you go out on the internet on your favorite search engine, put in car cards and waybills, you will get inundated with all kinds of articles and discussions and everything else going way back from the hobby press and everything else. It's been around for quite some time and is widely used. The basic concept is you have a car card which describes the specific card. In this graphic here over on the far right side is an unfolded car card folder. In use, the bottom of that thing would fold up. And so that represents a gondola, which is a GB representation. It's a Pennsylvania Railroad car with a part with car number 387819, and it is brown. So that helps you identify what the car is. So you can always find the car. Now, if you're looking to see where the car is going or where it's been, where it should be, you have the waybill. Now that gives you information on whether it's loaded, empty, where it should be going, and routings. Sitting the other graphic over there is a waybill representation. And first thing you'll notice is that waybill does not go with that car card, because in the upper left-hand corner, the car card is a gondola, but the waybill represents a hopper. So that waybill would never be used with that car card. The waybill shown here is actually 2 cycles, which is 2 uses. The 1 and the 2, and I'll get an example of that here down a little further. So what you're going to set up is you got a car card for every car. Every industry has multiple waybills. Each waybill represents a car that you want to go to that industry. And you can have multiple cars lined up for each industry. You can have multiple loads or empties of types, and that's what's represented there. My particular implementation for generating the car cards and waybills, I have acquired a set of Excel spreadsheets that were no cost, and they print out real nice. If you look at, like I said, you see the graphics I have of my car cards and waybills, those are all generated off the spreadsheets I have, and if we have time, we might get into more of those. And I'm currently using what's called a 4-cycle waybill. Now, if you notice, the waybill shown here has a 1 and a 2, half and half on each, and on the back of it has a 3 and a 4. So you use one activity, you turn it over, use the other activity, then you turn it back, front to back, and you use the other 2 activities. Let's go ahead and step down, Bob. For setting up the basic initial setup, you go into your layout, you identify your towns, your yards, and your industries. You determine what goes in and goes out of each industry, whether it's loads or empties, and what type of car. And that helps you determine, what the waybills are going to be and what the car cards is, as well as identifying what cars you need to buy, what you need to have on your roster. Once you have your identities of cars and loads and industries and what goes where, you look at what types of trains you're going to be running. Now, you've got the through trains that run from point to point, from city to city, which pick up and drop off blocks at major yards. Real quick, Bob, let's go down a page and see. Okay, this is my layout. Just for example, it is a point to point. There is no return loop. There is no continuous run. So up at the top on the one peninsula is a large staging yard, which is Meadville. Down at the bottom is the Kent, which is the west staging yard, which is the other major staging yard. And then I have another small staging yard in the middle, which represents 2 different locations. So a through train will come out of Meadville, will stop and drop off cuts of cars in Youngstown, and then it'll continue on and possibly drop off cuts of cars in Leavittsburg, which I don't have labeled here, but is in the loop on the far right side. And then it'll continue on to Kent. So that's a through train. It doesn't work any of the industries. It just drops and picks up blocks of cars at the major yards. Then you have the yard master in Youngstown who breaks down those blocks into what will go out in locals or turns. So he will put together a group of cars that will go off to work the industries in Niles. And he'll put together another block of cars that will go off and work their industries in Warren. And once he gets a number of cars together, he will call out an engineer or crew to do the switching of all the industries in Niles or all the industries in Warren. And then the local crew goes out and does that. As I say, as I highlighted, if you were there for my layout tour a couple months ago, I go with a proto freelance concept where I freelance the actual trackage, but I follow the prototype of the Erie Lackawanna as most close as possible. My through trains are labeled and numbered and routed based on historical Erie Lackawanna trains running this route. So I have several trains that go from Meadville to Kent. I also have one that goes from Meadville to Cleveland and another one from Cleveland to Meadville. And that's how they actually ran. So again, once we have a group of cars up in Cleveland, they go into that yard there. I'm working on the industries around Cleveland right now. We'll swap out cars and such like that. If you, if you go back up one slide there, Bob, if you please.
That might be interesting. Hang on a minute.
Give it a try.
Whoop, hang on.
No problem, not a problem.
We're gonna get over here.
Okay.
To set up or car cards?
Yeah, the setup.
Hang on a minute. We'll get there.
Not a problem.
From current slide, here we go. There, bang. Back there, go.
All right, thank you. As I said, so like I said, we put together the trains, whether it's a through train that just drops the blocks at major yards or the locals who are going to go out and do the detailed switching. And final part of setup is assigning cars to trains. And that's where you tuck a waybill into a card slot on a car, and away it goes. I get next slide there, if you would, please. Just there you go. Like I said, I'm using spreadsheets. This is a spreadsheet you uses for generating cards. It also provides inventory and other information. The first columns, AAR, road number and color, which actually go on the label onto the cards. The other columns for the name, type of car, the Cadies, the weights and the wheels, those are for my maintenance information, so I can keep track of which cars are up to date and things like that. I've only got about 210 items in my current file. So what happens is you take that card, you see the yellow highlighted columns at the top, that tells you which card numbers or which file numbers are going to be printed out. Go to the next spreadsheet, Bob. And this is what the printout looks like. You print out 5 cars at a time, you cut them off of, and you fold up the bottom and you tape it, and that becomes a pocket. I use a heavier card stock, laser printer. So you print out 5 cars at a time, and that generates all that. And makes a nice printed, clearly identified. Go on to the next one, Bob. This is the waybill spreadsheet. This is only a very small part of it. It's a very large, complex thing. It has, if you notice, the colored sets of columns. Each one of the colors, it represents a cycle. So there'll be 4 of those across. And each cycle has a via, which tells me the train that's going to be running, or the train number that I'm going to use for moving it, where it's coming from, where it's going to, or where it's going to, and what it is. So, and then it has the via, which is routing information. And this gets printed out on a little lighter cardstock. Go ahead to the next one, Bob. Well, this is an example of 4 cycles. That's where what we really want to get to. So this is a refrigerated boxcar. The first cycle there shows that it goes to Cleveland. It goes to my Kroger distribution center, and it goes up there on the Meadville, Cleveland train. It's coming from Meadville, and it's got dry goods in it. Once it gets to Cleveland, completes its first cycle, we turn the card end for end, and now it's lined up to go from Cleveland to Meadville, back to Meadville as on Cleveland Meadville train 2, and it's running as an empty. So that's an empty and a load. The next routing is from Meadville to Kent. So this car is actually used as a fill out in my train. It's not switched out en route. It just runs the full length from one end to the other. And the final fourth one is running back from one end to the other on its complementary train. And then it goes back to Cleveland, then to Meadville, then Kent to Meadville, and it continues the cycle. Most commonly, the people, say, "Oh, gee whiz, cars is just such a hassle," because you got to keep track of all them and so many of them. On my railroad, my through trains max out at roughly 12 cars. So that's really a manageable deck. It's not too bad. Why don't you go ahead and go ahead and close that out, Bob. Okay. And I'm going to give folks some minute highlights. From my standpoint, if you're worried about carrying a deck, you get yourself a nail apron. There's a couple of pockets where you can drop your cards into one pocket. You drop your controller in the other pocket. As you go out and work an area, each switching area has a little platform. It has a set of pockets with each siding where you can put the car cards that have been that are being worked. So it comes in, you drop it, it needs to be worked. It works up in the back. Once it's ready to go, you drop it back in there with where it's going. So when the local comes back, he takes a quick glance at the cards, see which ones need to go back with him. He picks up those cars, he picks up the cards, and he's ready to go back. I've also built this nice little shelf where you can set the controller and you can lay out the cards. If you're doing sorting and things, you got some place you can park a card, and it's not a big deal. I like the car cards. One of the biggest advantages I think to them is the flexibility. If you got too many cars going someplace at any particular time, you just change out the waybills. One of the common problems I came across in talking to various operators at some of the series weekends, where you get a variety of operators from very experienced to first timers. A lot of time, the first timers get confused, get a little lost. They'll see a car they don't know what to do with, so they just sort of leave it someplace, or they'll pick up the car, not really reading the card, and they'll haul it off. If you're using computerized switch lists and things like that, once the session is over, now you got to go work the whole layout and make sure all the cars are where the computer thinks they are. And I've run into a couple of operators, especially ones with several hundred cars on the layout, get very upset when they spend a lot of time trying to restage. With car cards, if somebody parks the wrong car in the wrong place, just like the prototype, the working crew comes out, they say, "Hey, this doesn't belong here." Pick it up, take it back to the yard, it goes out on the next one, and they try again. If you find you don't have a car card, then you got to go out and do a little bit of searching. So that's sort of my take on the car cards. Like I say, it's been around for quite some time, and I think it works quite well. I'm in the process of I think simplifying mine a little bit. Unfortunately, I haven't had any operation testers. It's just me and Mike have pretty much done everything back here right now. Thanks to efforts last Friday, I now have capabilities for 6 throttles. So hopefully I can get some people here in the basement brave enough to give it a try here coming up. And with that, I guess I'll move on.
couple of introductory comments. I listened to you guys talk about the operations, and I feel like a rank beginner, but we're having a lot of fun doing it. This is all about the Belton and Hurley. Belt me, Hurley is my wife. And these are kind of the answers to the questions that Larry had put out. And you can kind of see what the answers to it is. Why did I choose it? Well, it was the easiest at the time we did it. Nothing on the layout did that. This is I think the third or fourth version of this particular layout. I did think about doing car cards, but as Jeff pointed out, it's kind of a hassle because I don't really have all of my cars in a roster yet and have all of the numbers and all of that sort of a thing. So I stuck with a little bit different. It's just switch lists. Didn't cost anything. My main activity is in preparation is running some spreadsheets that I've got, and I have to do that on a monthly basis. Once the trains are set up, it's pretty much an idea of just changing the date on the spreadsheet. So there really isn't all that much of a thing. I think I've got 20 some different trains, but we run in a 2-hour session. We only get through approximately half talk about that a little bit better. My problem right now is because I'm running in the garage, it is get a little bit busy. Sometimes it gets pretty congested on running it. We originally started off running a fast clock, and that didn't work at all. Because of the way we were running, the yardmaster was tearing hair for the first 20 or 30 minutes, and all the engineers were sitting around on their thumbs. So we finally said, hey, let's play this a little bit differently, and I'll describe that in a little bit more. Positions, fundamentally, dispatcher, yardmaster, and engineers, and it's once in a while when we get more than the 4 or 5 operators, if I get up like 6 or 7, we'll have engineer conductor crews, and courtesy of Jeff Hedge and Mike, they ran an engineer conductor crew and did it with hand signals, no less, which was fantastic. I learned a lot on that one. What do I like? I like it because it's fun. And the biggest problem I've got is it runs a little bit too short on time. Anyway, let's get into a little bit more of the description of where things are. This is an overview of the layout over here on the left. It's a model. Runs from the yard down here in the lower right-hand corner out. Can you see my cursor moving?
Yeah.
Okay, we're running out westbound here past Fur Top. That's a thing, it's the first stop. On over around over the overpass to Midway, on around to Hurley, which is the top of the hill, and then down into the hidden siding or northwest north siding, which is a hitting and staging yard, and then on around either back onto the main loop or into the yard itself. Talk about that a little bit better. You'll see that in some of the paperwork that I'm going to show you here in a little bit. This next one, I'll talk about some more as I go through it. The string drawing is this piece up here on the top, which starts off in the yard, runs westbound out, and then turns and runs back. Apologize for not getting it real big. And I think I've got a little bit better picture of it. I'll show you here in a little bit. And I want to come back to Bill Paulsell, who was my inspiration for my crew call listing with all of the tabs and my call list. And first come, first serve. When they come in, whoever wants to pick up, the yard master, and each of these down this low are the individual trains that we're running, and that runs out from the start out through the noon time. Okay, again, this is the overview, a little bit larger, but it kind of gets a better idea. And you guys, if you watched the movie that we had back in June or July, you saw us starting down here in the yard and then coming out past Fur Top. Didn't show it real good to show the lake and Lakeside, which is down here, and a mine. This is basically a switching layout. I'm limited because of grades to about a max of 4 cars at any one time. Although we have double-headed a little bit. The ruling grade is this piece from right here around this corner, which is at about a 2.5%. And this is number 4 curves, 18-inch radius minimum on it for the layout. As far as the string drawing, this one shows it a little bit better. That's the same one you saw before. This is the yard. These, by the way, are copies of the panels that I run on it. Yardmaster does all of the assembly of the trains and the breakdown of it. The crews do all of the switching in various different locations on down the yard. Again, here's the crew roster that runs down and the crew call. And again, I got to give credit to Bill Paulsell for this because he was my inspiration for that, and it seems to work pretty good. Okay, now a couple of things of what the paperwork looks like. This is the one that the dispatcher uses, and although I use times down through here, we really work on the basis of how the yardmaster sets the trains up. There are a couple that are pre-staged, as this one right here, because of the number of cars that are in it. These are destinations, the two-letter abbreviations as we go out: the Belton Yard, the Belton Depot, the Hurley, Midway, the Furtop Mine, Furtop Lakeside, back to the Belton Depot and back to the Belton Yard. This is a combine. This first train is really the crew train that runs out. It's a passenger combine that sets people out. Most of the rest of them are actual switching locations. And well, let me see. Okay, this is what the yardmaster sees. This is a part of one of the 2 sheets. I've got both a morning and afternoon. The departures identified in here tells what it is. Does say what the time is, but we don't really pay an awful lot of attention to that. It's how soon does the yardmaster get it set up. In this case, it identifies what the train number is, the direction, in this case west, the locomotive, which in this case I'm using a 70-tonner, and it is a mine switch, and it takes the engine out and actually does some switching on it. These are steps that are for the yardmaster to understand, set up for whatever the trains are. Then the arrivals show the other thing of what trains are coming in. The actual switch list looks kind of like this. Everything in between these 2 dotted lines are things that the engineer and the engineer conductor will do. In this case, we're taking a freight that's going to go from the Belton Yard to Hurley to Midway and back to the Belton Yard. At Hurley, we're going to pick up a couple of boxes. We're going to drop a box. They are loaded. Over at Midway, we're going to leave Hurley with 4 cars and a caboose. By the way, I say return this. I've got an oil car in the middle of Hurley so that whoever's doing the switching has to work around it. My philosophy on switching is I didn't want to screw around with numbered cars and oh, by the way, the car card thing. So it's pretty much left to the engineer. And courtesy of Randy Kaufman, I use some Plastistruck H beam material with labels for load and empty, and those sit on top of the walks on all of the cars. If I didn't mention it before, my whole railroad is a California foothills theme, 1950s transition era. All of the cars, all of the box cars have walkways on them. Even the gondolas and things like that have a place to be able to put one of those cars. The yardmaster, when we set it up, has a number of loads and empties in the yard, and he assembles the trains from there.
Hey.
The conductor, the engineer, when they deliver a car at their, I'll say one of it to one industry, and when they deliver it, they will switch that tab from load to empty or empty to load, and it's their responsibility. When the train comes back into the yard, then the yardmaster has the responsibility of switching it. Those are all done automatically in JMRI. for any time you're working in a yard or staging or something like that. But back to this is the engineer activity. Tells them where we're going to start from. They're going to start from Belton Yard, but they're going to go to Hurley. They're going to go on from there to Midway. In this case, it is an eastbound train for this particular switch. And then he'll deliver that back to the Belton Yard again. And that's the termination. My future ideas for that is I'm going to put in a engine servicing yard. I think I spelled that right. Hope to eventually get to JMRI and load up the rosters, load out all of the specs. And this is one of the things that Jeff was talking about what the siding links are, how many cars they are, with their locations and that sort of a thing. And have JMRI actually do the generation of the switch list. Still haven't quite figured out whether or not I'm going to do car cards or yacht, car cards or not. But the biggest problem I have and why we don't do this in N is I can't see them. And I hate to see people wandering around with optimizers and magnifying glasses to try and read car number things on it. One of the other things I really would like to do eventually is go to a 3-hour op session, just so we can get on into the afternoon. We haven't done that yet. I've tried starting in the morning and tried starting in the afternoon to see whether or not we could get it. And we haven't gotten all the way through it. But like I said, right at the beginning of this, I really feel like kind of a beginner at the whole operations thing, but it's a lot of fun. And I really enjoy having the guys who
Part of the clinic on operations and the date and so on. So I went through the questions myself and I kind of answered them. And, why did I choose this method? On the first one, I did some operations down in Atlanta. I would get on Word and write up my own instructions, tell what the train is, what they had to do and so on. And going to various industries and so on. But after I started doing that, after I got about 3 or 4 or 5 trains, I kind of got confused on, was this boxcar in this location or did I put it in this location? So I kind of got confused, and I'd still do it, but when I got to here in Lexington, as people mentioned, Pete Birdsong was the one I really got into, and somebody else is doing operations. And I know he did, he used rail ops, and I purchased it, but then JMRI, which is very similar to the way it operates and so on, I switched to that. And rail ops, I'll talk about more JMRI later, how you implement it, but it's kind of a way of its own to create the trains and where they're going and so on. I guess the layout, how did my layout? Well, on my layout, I've got a number of industries that can be switched. I have a couple yards, about 3 yards that I can use for switching. Trains are made up in the yard with the yard masters, and they're sent out in each direction to the industries to switch. Some trains I just go right around the layout, but since I have it kind of set up with yards, that trains can be made up in there and sent out to the industries and then go back to the yards. So that's it kind of fits the way JMRI does. I did consider car cards. I bought a set of car cards. I think I've kind of got an idea with the car cards. I know when I was always given a deck, it's like, oh, do I have to pick up that one or not, or so on. So I think with a little more practice, I can pick that up, and I'd like to do some more of that. I guess I really didn't consider anything else. I kind of like the way Rail Ops and JMRI handles it. I know there are some other software packages you can buy. I think Ship It and some other ones that you can use, but I hadn't really gone into those yet. Cost, if you're using JMRI, that's free. And if you're familiar with JMRI, I do the operations section. You know, it has a section which Tom Benberg said earlier, you can use it to program your decoders. It will handle signals. I think there's also Roger Merritt has done some work with the dispatcher feature, which you need. If you have detection, you can set up the trains kind of run on their own, which is kind of neat. The only other thing you need, I have a computer, and I guess the connection to the layout. I guess I need printer and paper so that I can print up the sheets to give to the yard masters and the engineers. How to implement? For JMRI, one of the first things you have, setting up the first thing is set up what they call your, you have your settings, which are basically saying that you can name your railroad, you want print size, you want your paper to come out of, kind of your basic things for setting it up. And then to get into the meat of it thing, when you're for the trains, you put in your locations. Locations are any place that you want trains to start or end at. Basically all your industries and your yards. And then you can put in your cards, or your cars, I'm sorry. And there's a bunch of information you can put on them, who made them, and all sorts of things. I basically put in the color, the type it is, the number, and any kind of note which says it's got a white top on it, so people can know what it is when they're looking for it, when they come to an industry and looking for that card, that they can tell what kind of car it is. The next thing is these kind of build on each other, because you put in your cars, it asks you for your location. So you got to put in your locations first. And then once you got your cards in, you can set up your routes. And a route is anything which goes from one location to the other. It can be a route all the way around the layout. It could be a route that goes just from one industry to the industry right next to it, depending on what you want to do and how you want your trains to go. And the last one is the trains, and those are, then you pick out a route for that, and more than one train can use the same route. But for the trains, I guess for mine, I kind of set up with my industries, you can set up where it takes certain cars. In mine, there's a certain type of randomness to it where it will pick up, an industry will not have the same cars maybe every time. You don't really know for sure which cars are going to be picked up and put in an industry. In the location you've got, tells how long your track is and so on. So with the train, there's a bit of randomness. Some people, you can get more specific. If you have you're gonna have certain trains, certain cars you want, in certain industries you want to move them to, you can do it with JMR2. We have a schedule, and then what it does is I set up a list of trains. And as I said, some will go all the way around the layout. Some will go out from the switching ones will go out from a yard, go to one or two industries or so on, and then come back to the yard. And I usually schedule maybe about 12, 13, 14 trains, which kind of can last 2 to 3 hours. And I kind of let persons choose their own jobs. Whichever train they want to take. Some people choose yard master if it's up on their own. If they want to, they can go ahead and do that. Whatever people want to do. So, and about the only other thing I give is some basic rules of the road. Using the whistle. Kind of, if you come to a siding or come to a meet, who should have so on. Usually people work it out on their own. So when I get my signals up, maybe I can do more with that. And the only other thing I do is, you know, give help when needed. I usually just float around and kind of go in between the dispatcher and everybody else and kind of tell them, dispatcher, what's going on. And if something doesn't work, kind of try to fix it or whatever. But that's basically how you implement it, putting in your data, getting a schedule of trains, getting people over, let them choose their jobs, and kind of make it a kind of low key, and just kind of the emphasis is on fun. Oh, this is, well, I threw this in the Panel Pro. This is, when you have JMRI, this is kind of an older version too. But this is what it looks like to start up the thing. And you can see operations on there is one of the things. You click on that one, it'll open up to all the things about the trains and locations and so on. And this is the one that's free. I could have got a better. This is a switch list. This is kind of what, when they print out things for you, the engineers will get a thing which tells which train it is. We'll tell you what engines you want to use. I kind of use it up. You kind of recommend to the yard man. I give the yard masters a lot of say in how they want to set, how do they want to make the trains up, and I tell them they can use these engines and so on. But I usually let them, give them a lot of leeway in getting things done. So this is just basically a switch list. One of the things is, you can tell it has different colors here. Pickups are different colors than the setouts. Pickups are blue, setouts are red. Kind of helps the engineers then, because when you go around, that kind of tells you the same colors, what to set out, what to pick up. And this is as you go around the layout, then it tells you what to do at various locations. That's kind of, I should have a better example, but that's kind of an idea there. As I said, we try to make it casual, low key. I've heard of some people try to make it, you know, where you give you kind of trouble or whatever, with certain trains are hard to do or whatever, but try to make everything casual, try to get everybody involved. I usually make up some of the trains to start, so we don't have people standing around while the yard masters are making up the first trains. And then what I have is I print out the schedule of trains and usually let people pick which ones they want. So kind of leave it up to them, whatever they want to volunteer for. I usually have a place to sit down in here. I know some places I've been in, you're kind of standing for 2 or 3 hours, and so I usually have some place. So I usually also try to have snacks and drinks available. Usually some cookies, nuts, or whatever, just to kind of, if somebody wants to snack around or something while they're not running the train or whatever. That's what kind of what a typical session is. And I said it runs about 2 to 3 hours. We've already talked about the regular engineers. Is one position. Sometimes if there's somebody new, we'll put somebody with them. So we have 2 on a train. Or if somebody wants to, you know, they can take 2 together or take 1 train, both of them can. Yard masters, we have about 2 or 3 yards, depending on how many people show up. We always use 2 yards or maybe 3 if they show up. If more people show up, sometimes we get 12 or more on there. And the dispatcher, the one who can tells people when to leave and when if they have to go in a certain siding or so on. Kind of directs, kind of like the director, really, in a way. So those are the regular positions we have. I know under JMRI you can have holsters, towermen, some other ones if you want them. Likes and dislike. I guess like not complicated. Well, it's not really complicated to start in there. Once you get in, you kind of have to play with a lot of things. You kind of have to play with it. You can get more complicated if you want. I'm going to get in more into schedules and some other features. The minimum paperwork, I kind of like that. Can only have one sheet around, and it's not really hard to learn, just to start out and get going. If you want to get into some other things, it does get a little harder. Dislike, well, I guess I really can't think of anything at the moment right now. I know I'm going to try to get on my layout. I mean, for running trains, if you let a train have about anything kind of car you want, and the industry's kind of any car to it, you know, trains can be made up quite easily then, because in that case. But I think I'm going to try to go towards, you know, certain industries having certain cars, and kind of maybe a place for them to go in the future and get into things.